Okay, so uh, in our previous sessions, we discussed theory of OAuth 2.0 and we understood how OAuth 2.0 work, what are different flows in it, and how those flows work. In today's session, we are going to implement OAuth 2.0 and we will understand how actually we can configure different systems and how this interaction actually happens, right? And we'll understand each and every component in detail. So in today's implementation, I'm going to use um, Mulesoft as my protected resource and Okta as authorization server. We will use Postman as our client, right? So let's understand this and implement it. And before we start our implementation, let's look at the diagram that we created in our previous session, and then we go from there, right? So I hope you remember this diagram, right? So this is our authorization server. Just give me a second, right? So this is our authorization server. This is our protected resource. This is my client, and this is the resource owner, right? So in our implementation, what we are going to do is um, protected resource will be mule, right? We will implement protected resource in the mule. Authorization server will be Okta, right? And this will be a Postman, right? And I will be the resource owner, right? So I will try to explain how these systems connect and how these are working. Okay. So let's first talk about the protected resource, right? And then we will set up the Okta. So in this protected resource, uh, what I'm going to do is, I mean, we have discussed this already. So in the protected resource, we will have some APIs which we need to protect and which we want client to which client want to access, right? And to get this access, resource owner has to give this client authorization before it can access it, right? So which means, I mean, we have to first create a resource, and when I'm saying the resource, it means we have to create a API, right? And then in the mule, there is a specific way to implement or apply the policies, or to there is specific way to secure our APIs, and we are going to learn that in this session, right? So these concepts that are the terminologies that I'm going to use in this video remain same. It I mean, maybe it will not matter much even if you are implementing OAuth 2.0 in any other tool or the technology, right? So I will try to generalize this concept as much as I can, right? And in the mule, actually, it's a very simple or very elegant, I would say, to apply policies to secure our resources, or basically, I would say to implement OAuth 2.0, right? So what I'm going to do is, first I will uh, first I have to create an API. Okay, so here, so say suppose this is a API. Okay, first I have to create an API, and then I have to create some another component that we called that we called proxy, right? So on top of that API, I will create a proxy like this. So this will be kind of our structure. So this is my API, right? And it will be, this API will be protected by this proxy. Okay, so and how it will work, we will discuss in detail, right? So basically your client or whoever want to access this API, right? This API, he has to first obviously connect to the Mule, right? Mule servers, and then the request will come to this proxy API. Okay, so he will access this proxy API. So proxy API will validate the request and it will apply the OAuth 2.0, right? And if it proxy finds everything good, valid, then only it will forward that request to the API, right? So my resource is protected, right? And if you see that we have this is how we implement in the Mule, right? If you are not very much familiar, and it does not matter that you understand the Mule or not, to understand OAuth 2.0 or particularly this session, right? And I mean there is a lot of stories, there are a lot other concepts that we implement in the Mule to apply these things, right? But for now it's okay. So let's first implement this API, simple API, right? Very simple API we're going to develop, and then create this proxy, right? And then we will configure OAuth 2.0 here. Okay. Okay, so to implement the API in the Mule, we use a tool called AnyPoint Studio, which is this. So let's go ahead and do this. So here we are, file, new, Mule project. So let's say we can name anything. Calculator. And everything, let for now let's keep everything default. Okay, here's our API, right? So right now our focus is to understand the OAuth 2.0. So I'm not going to discuss what components I'm implementing or anything related to the Mule. Okay, so let me use a listener. So this listener, let me configure it. Okay, v081, that's fine. And let's have one resource called add logger. Okay, let's write a log method. Right, and then the set the payload. Payload will be equal to So let's okay, now here we are. So let me do this payload dot x, so, and payload dot y. All right, and value equal to this, right? So this is simple API. I mean, it has one resource and the one URL, which is like slash add, and it what it will do, it will take the x and y parameters from the body, from the JSON body, right, and it will add it and return the result of that add, right? So it's a simple API, right? And this can be simple because our purpose from this exercise is not to understand how we build the Mule APIs, but to understand how OAuth 2.0 work, right? And it will work in all other platforms or the tools in the same way, right? So which means there will be an API, right, that we want to protect or protect from with the OAuth 2.0 mechanism, right? So this is our API. So let's deploy it once, right, and test it locally before we deploy it on before we deploy it on Anypoint Studio. I mean Anypoint platform. Okay, so my Anypoint Studio. Okay, so my API is actually deployed on the local Mule runtime environment. So it's, which means it's ready for the testing. So I will go to the Postman and I will use this localhost 8081 because that is the port on which my API is running, and the URL is add, right? So I will go here and I will say add. Okay, that's fine because it needs a JSON payload. First value is x, which is 3, and then y as 5, right, and let's send. Okay, so it's 9. It means our API is ready, but the resource is ready, right? So now I'm going to deploy this calculator API on Anypoint platform so that we can access its URL publicly. Okay, so what I will do is export, right, click on the Mule runtime, Mule project, next, right? So that's fine, let's export it here, finish. Okay, so it is, yeah, so here's my jar file, right, where which contains the code for this API that we just now created. Next, we need to go to Anypoint platform, Mule Anypoint platform, where we are going to deploy this, and where we are going to deploy this API. So this Mule Anypoint platform, right? If you have user ID password, you can use it, your existing user ID password. But if you do not have, you can sign up and create a test account. So let's create one test account. Email, phone number. some phone number, right? Self, username, say suppose 20, password can be anything. Okay, here I'm not robot, agree and accept. Already exists. Okay, so this one exists, let's say 200. Okay, so my account is created. Okay, that's fine, I don't want to save it. Okay, so this is my this is my anypoint mule anypoint platform where we basically deploy our APIs. Okay, so again, uh, from our diagram, we are working on this. So I'm going to deploy this API, right? And this API has a resource that we just now created, and the resource is slash add, right? Okay, here. So I will go to runtime manager. Sandbox. Okay, click on deploy application. Calculator test. Okay, so calculator test name is available, and here's choose file, upload a file. Yep, here it is. Okay, 4.0. Okay, so let's leave everything default, doesn't matter because okay, so now I'm deploying my application on Mule anypoint platform. Okay, okay, so it takes a while actually to deploy the application, and it start the application. Okay, so I have to wait for it to start before we go to next step, because in the next step I'm going to create my proxy. Okay, so in the Mule, this is how in Mule this is how we do this, right? So we do not implement authorization or authentication, right, in the API itself. We keep it out, separate, right. So those things go in the proxy, and to any external client who want to access this API, they have to hit the proxy URL, and then the URL apply all the policies or the authentication authorization, and if everything looks good, then it forward that request to the resource. Okay, so next I will work on this, so we'll see how this thing is going to work. Okay, um let's see how's the status. Application started, so it's started, perfect. We come over here, let's look at here. So, okay, so this is the URL, public URL for my API. Okay, let's test if it's still working or not. System is slow, so it pasted that twice, that's bad. Okay, we are here. Let's see. Okay, so it's still working. Now I hope you can see the difference. So in the when I access this add resource, right, I use the local host, which means I access my local instance, but this time I'm using it the API that I just now deploy on the on Mule platform or on the cloud, right? So I have this public URL and add is my resource name, right? So we are done with the API, which means this part. Now I'm going to create a proxy, right? And this proxy will basically validate jot token, right? We'll see that when I will configure it, but for now that's fine. Let's first create the proxy itself, right? So again, that proxy will be created on AnyPoint platform. So I have to go to the API manager, which is here. Okay, so come over here. I will say create new API, and I want to create an asset. Asset name is proxy, right? And the asset type is HTTP API. Let's click on the next. Now I mean there is a lot of details, okay, to cover here. There is a reason that why I'm selecting this one and not doing this, right? But that is not the agenda for this video, right? This tutorial. So we can discuss it. We'll discuss it definitely in different video, right? Now so I'm going to say endpoint with proxy, right? Because I needed a different proxy URL and a different application. Okay, so I want to have my Mule version 4 implementation URL. So my implementation URL I could copy from Mule runtime as well, but I can copy it from here, doesn't matter, right? So this was the if you remember, this is the URL for my API. So I have to provide this in the proxy, right? So that proxy know where it need to forward the request after applying auth or jot validation. Okay, so this guy done. I think we are good for now. Yep, so we are good. Now this should be the last one, and this is proxy application name, right? So proxy application name is calculator proxy, calculator proxy, right? Let's make everything small. Calculator proxy, right? And then click on the deploy. So what this application will do is this will deploy a new application, a new proxy application. Okay, so as per our diagram, we are now deploying proxy API or proxy application. Okay, so this guy will have different URL. Okay, so now going forward, if I want to access this API or the resource, I will access it through API URL, proxy API URL. Okay, so I will hit the proxy API URL. It will apply all the policies whatever I have defined or I will define, right? If everything goes smooth, then it will forward the request to actual API. Okay, so this we are okay. So still that proxy API is being deployed. Meanwhile, I can close it for this now, right? And once we have auth server details, okay, once we have auth server details, I will come here in on this screen proxies, and I apply a new policy. I will come to the policies, and I will create a new policy. But right now I do not have all the details from my auth server, so I'm not doing it. I will do it in a second. Okay, but I can still go and check on my runtime manager if another application has been created and is being deployed. Okay, so if you see, this is my actual API, right? And this is my proxy API, which is just now got created. So the URL for the proxy API is this. Okay. Okay, here. So let's access this API to the proxy. Okay, so I'm still able to access my API. So I hope now you can see I'm accessing proxy URL, right? Okay, so now if you see here, we are done with this part. Okay, we have completed the proxy API and the actual API, right, which is protected by the proxy API. So in the proxy API, I still need to do some work, but we'll look into it in a moment, right? Now I'm going to work on this part, which is my authentication server. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are going to use Okta as our authorization server, right? So we are going to work on the authorization server now. I'm sorry. So, and we are going to use Okta as our authorization server. So this is our Okta website, right? I mean, you can just create a account here if you want to try this by yourself, right? And create a free trial account, right? And I think you can use that free trial account for 30 days. Okay, so I've already created one, so I'm going to use that. Okay, so you need, if so, because I have already created it, so I can click on here, it will get me here. So it will ask me to confirm if this is the account which I want to use to log in. I would say yes, right? Okay, password, I'm entering my password. Let's see. Okay, it has sign main. Let's go to your organization, right? And now I want to go to the admin console. I will come here. So it sends it has the dual authentication, right? So I will get the code from my mobile authenticator, right? And enter here. So I'm entering this code from my mobile. Okay, so this is our authorization server. Okay, so this is third party authorization server, right? So I mean, Okta is a company that provide you functionality of the authorization server. So if, say, suppose, I mean, in case of in my case, right, say suppose I'm building an API, right, that will be used by many other people, right? So instead I invest money and I build my own authorization server or authentication server, right? I can use these third parties who provide these services, right? So I can use their service for the authorization. Okay, so anyone who want to access my API, right, anyone who want to access my API, they have to get authenticated and authorized here, right? And this server will basically authenticate and authorize them, right? And once they are authorized, they will come to access my API, right? They will come here to access my API, right? So these are basically third parties who's provide this kind of authorization services, right? And there are other details, but that is not the agenda for this video, right? So let's come over here and see how we do the basic setup in uh, Okta to at least to enable a basic authorization. Okay, so first we'll come over here, right? We'll go to the API. Okay, this is where we can configure our authorization server, right? So when you create a new account, you will get one default authorization server. I mean, if you want, you can use this one, or if you want, you can create the new authorization server, right? So let me create a new authorization server for this, for my API. So my API is calculator, so I will create an authorization server called calculator. Calculator, right? Audience, right? So audience is the URL, right? Or the it can be URL, it can be a name as well, right? It basically indicates who will use the uh, access token created by this authorization server, right? And it can have multiple audience, right? So for me, it's a calculator API. You can give some description if you want. All right. Okay, that looks good. Here, scope, right? So here we have already some scope which are defined, right? If you want, you can add new scope. Okay, so let's add one scope, and that scope will be cal underscore add, right? So because this is related to the addition API, right? So you can use some naming convention, whatever suits your requirement. So display phrase, you can enter whatever you want to see in different user interfaces, right? Description, can add description. User consent, we'll discuss it in a while, right? Default scope, no metadata, including public metadata, yes, right? I will discuss that. And I will if time permits, then we will discuss it, right? This one. So if you click on this, right, just for your understanding, if you click on this, right, then a consent will be asked from the user, right? If you do not click this, then consent will not be asked. Consent means, if you remember in our theory session, right, when you resource owner provides his user ID password to the Google account, Google sends a consent and asking draw.io is requesting to use your account, do you want to give? So that was a consent, right? So for this scope, if you want user to get or give the consent, right, then you click on this, and if you do not want, don't do anything, just click on create, right? And then you have claims, right? So if you have any claim, you can add here. So as I have already mentioned, anything which is in the payload, jot token payload, everything is a claim, right? So you, if you have any custom claim, you can add it here. Okay, so we can add one. Let's add calculator add, right? Just to understand this access token, I want this in my access token, not in the ID token, because ID token is something related to the OAuth. I'm forgetting the name of the protocol that is used for the authentication. OpenID Connect, OAuth OpenID Connect. Okay, so and then you select here expression, and here you can write the expression or the value for this claim, right? So if there is a claim, right, if there is a key in the JSON, there will be value. So you can configure here expression to get the values, right? And if you click this link, right, you will get some expression. So let me use this one for now. The first name, you can go through this document, right, and you can get some idea the how we can use the different parameters to configure our claims. Create ad, right? So policy, right? Next we have to create a policy. Click on the add policy. This is calculator policy, calculator policy, right? Is this policy applied to all clients? I mean the all the applications who are going to access this API, or the specific clients, right? So create policy, that's fine. Right, so once you create the policy, you also have to add a rule, right? So here I mean few specific things, right? Few things like the one which I have used is this one, access token lifetime, right? So how long you want your access token to be valid, right? So you can specify 1 hour, 1 minute, 1 day, something like that, right? I think you cannot specify 1 minute, you have to have at least 10-minute window, something like that, right? So you can try it by yourself as per your requirement, right? So here you're going to say create rule. Okay, sure. Okay, I think we are done, right? So this is how we create the server, okay, authentication server in the Okta, right? And if you're creating, I mean your authorization provider is Azure or something else, right? Then the way you create this or the way you perform this step may be different, but more or less you may have to do the similar kind of thing, right? Now once we have authorization server, we have to define the applications, right? Now application means application means this guy, client. What does it mean is, say suppose I have this API which performs some task, performs some business functionality, right? And someone else, Mr. XYZ, want to access my API, right? I have to first set up this person, or set up Mr. XYZ as an application in my authorization server, right? And I have to provide him a user ID and password. Okay, so this is the meaning of adding an application. Okay, so I have to add an application in the Okta, right? So let's go over here and create an integration app, and I'm going to say OpenID, no, API, this one. No, I do not have, not this one. Secure web, Okta special. Yeah, this one. OIDC actually we have to select for this, and then select the web application. Okay, and now here you write the name of your application. Client. Okay, so what kind of grant types I want client credential, I want authorization code, and I also want the implicit implicit, right? And then this is redirect URI. Okay, so this is my redirect URI. Right now, if you still and if you can recall our previous session, I have explained what is redirect URI, right? So this is the URI where your authorization server will send the code and the access token, right? Now, if you remember, I have already mentioned, I'm going to use Postman as my client, right? So I have to or to the 0 request header, I have to use this URL as a callback, because authorization server will send the code and the access token on this URL. Okay, and this is actually, this URL is defined by the Postman, so this is a property of the Postman. Okay, and they go here. Well, this is good. No, I don't need that. And what else I need? I think that is everything. Let's see. Okay, so this is my client ID, client secret. Okay, user consent required, and here sign on. Assignment. Okay, so it has this client has myself, my user ID, right, as a user assigned. All right, and there is another user that I created for something else, so this is also assigned. So if I want, I can remove it, but for now it's okay. Okta API scopes, that's fine, that will work. Okay, so now I have a application defined, okay, for my authorization server. Right now we are done with this part as well. Okay, now next step. Okay, the next step is we need to provide all the detail to the client. Okay, we need to provide all the detail to the client, okay, so that it can access my API, right? So for that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to provide the URL of my proxy API to my client. That's the point number one, right? To access the API. But because my API is protected with the OAuth 2.0, so I need the access token in the request, right? Right. Before anyone can access my API, right? So this guy, the client, has to first connect to Okta, right, and get the access token before he even touch my API, right? So in the next step, we are going to configure client, right, so that it can get the access token. Okay, So let's do that. Okay, so to get the access token, if you remember my previous session, we have discussed how this dance work, right? So we need all that information that we have discussed in the theory. Okay, so how to get that, how to get all the details, right? In case of the Okta is come over here, right? Come to the API. So I'm basically going to my resource server that I just now defined. Okay, so click on this URL, right? And this can be different. Okay, so this can be different for another auth provider, right? So you may get this you have to get this information for sure, but the method may be different, right? They may have a particular URL where you need to go and get the information. In case of Okta, you click on this. Okay, so then control A, let's JSON online formatter. So I want to basically format this. Control V, nothing. There you go. Okay, so this is all the information, right, that we need to configure the client. So let's configure the client. So okay, authorization, we click on the authorization tab, type OAuth 2.0 and add authorization data to the request header. So that's fine, right? Now come over here, right? Access token, this is not header prefix bearer. So I have already explained you that in case of OAuth 2.0 we send the access token in the authorization header with bearer as a bearer token, right? And the bearer token means indicates that whoever has this access code, he has authority to use it, right? So here you have token name, doesn't matter, you can give anything, right? So what kind of grant type we are using? So right now we want to first use test everything with the authorization code grant type, right? And then callback URL. So this is, you can use your own callback URL, right, if you are implementing some client, but because I'm using the Postman, right, and I want my auth server to send or provide the code and the access token to the Postman so that it complete the flow, right? And eventually it add the access token in the header, right? Before I use my API, I have to use the callback URL which is provided by the Postman, right? And then you have auth URL and then the access token URL, right? Now let's get this value. Here is my authorization endpoint, so I'll copy this guy. All right, where I am here. There's my authorization URL. Next is my access token. Come over here. Where is my access? Yeah, here is token endpoint. Copy this guy. Okay, copy it here. Yep, here it is. Next is client ID and client secret. All right, so client ID will be go over here and let's go to our OAuth 2.0 application, and the client ID will be So client ID, when I created the client, right, or when I created the application, right, um, that system has created, or Okta has created a client ID and client secret for this particular application. And if you remember, I did mention this when we were discussing this, right? So when your client will send access, sorry, when your client will send the first request, auth request, to the auth endpoint, it sends the client ID, right? How it gets the client ID? It get the client ID when you was set up in the authorization server, right? And when after then your authorization server eventually send the code to the redirect URL, right here, right? Then the client sends the another request to token endpoint. Okay, this time it sends the client ID and client secret both to the authorization server, right? So that is what it is, right? So those values come from here. So when you're basically client or application set up in the authorization server generates the client ID, client secret. You to go here. What I did I copy it? Okay, click on copy. Paste it, and then client secret. Paste it. All right. Next is the scope. So if you remember, we did define a scope, right? So we have to use that scope. Okay. Scope. Scope, I can get it. Scope, I will get it from here. Actually, it should be in this metadata. I can copy it from the Okta as well, but I should able to find in this URL as well. Oh, sorry, Control F. Yeah, this is the scope. If you remember, this is the scope that I added. Okay. Okay. Here. Over here. Let's Control V. Okay. So I think we have place all the information here, right? And then you can define this state, right? And you can specify anything and some value, unique value, but okay, in the state field. Okay. And then here is my send the client credential in the body. That's fine. Okay. So in case of the auth, in case of the Okta requires you to send the client credential in the body, not in the header, not in the auth header. Okay. Client credential means when you send the access request. Okay. When you send the request to get the access token, right? I have explained, right? You application or client has to send the uh, client ID and client credential both. So click on the get access token, right? Okay, there you go, right? So here it is asking for the authentication. Okay, so let me enter my user ID password. Okay, and then password is okay, password is that. Okay, now this step is like the same thing. When I was explaining the theory, I enter my Google user ID password, right? So now your authorization server is authenticating me. Okay, click on the sign in. never for not now, right? And then click on here, allow, okay, proceed. There you go. If you see, entire auth dance has happened, right? And I got my access token. Okay, I can let me copy this. Okay, copy, and I would say use. Okay, what else is left? Okay, let's look at these ones. Okay, come over here. Control A, delete. There you go. Yeah, this is what I wanted to show. Right? If you remember, this is what we defined in the claim, right? And this is my audience. Okay, and this is the scope. Okay, so that's it. This is how we set up the auth, I mean, sorry, your authorization server. But the whole thing is not completed yet. I mean, there are still dots that need to connect. Okay, now let's go back to this. Now, so what has happened is we have successfully defined this guy, we have successfully partially defined this person as well, and this gentleman is able to connect to Okta server and get the access token. Okay, and remember that it's still doing everything. Okay, first connect to, okay, I will come to this. Okay, let's complete this implementation first. But there is something missing still in the proxy API. Okay, and what is missing? We haven't configured any proxy yet, and we haven't let our proxy API know that how and what kind of validation it need to apply on the request that it get before it submit to the API, before it forward the request to the API, before allow client to access the API. Okay, that we are going to now. Here, so I will go here and I can click on, I will click API manager, that because that is where I have defined my proxy. Okay, click my proxy, click on the policies. Okay, apply new policy, and here we have to apply jot policy, jot validation. Okay, jot validation. Okay, remember this name of this policy. Configure. Okay, so here we need to configure the policy first. I'm not, this going to different in different platforms, right? I'm explaining you how it will be in the mule, right? But I think more or less these fields will same in other platform, other ESBs as well. Okay, so it is asking how you're going to get the jot token, right? So default is HTTP bearer authentication header. So it is saying that jot token or the access token will come in the authentication header as a bearer token. Okay, that's fine. Jot signature method. So if you remember, we have discussed this when I explained when we discussed the jot JWT tokens, right, and how it is used to secure the APIs, right? So there are two ways, RSA and HMAC, right? In case of Okta, right, Okta use the RSA algorithm to sign the jot token. Means to create this part. Got it? Come over here where I was. Yeah, right. So we have to select the RSA. Okay. So JWT signing key length is actually 256 in case of Okta, right? And then the JWT key origin, right? Now, if you know, right? I mean, we have discussed it, so you must know actually. I have explained you that how jot token signature validation happens, right? So in case of the RSA, your authorization server will sign the jot token with the private key, right? Now to validate your jot token, right? Your resource owner or whoever want to validate that jot token, he need the public key. In case of in our implementation, it's a mule, or I would say the proxy API inside the mule want to validate that jot token before it let the request access the API, right? So we need to let our proxy API know that where is the where is the public key, right? So in case of the Okta, we can get that URL from here. I can see it here easily. Yeah, GKS URL. Okay. So this is where our public key is available. Okay. This is where our public key available for this server. Okay. For this server that I created for you. Okay. So for every your server will have separate public the private public key, right? So I want my API or the mule proxy API to go to this location. Okay, and let me open it and show you. Okay, so if you see, this is my public key, right? So and your API manager or the code inside it know how to extract that the public key, right? It will use that public key to validate the jot token, right? Skip client ID validation because we don't want to go that, right? Well, if these are the different ways you can validate your claim, right? If you want to validate the audience claim, you can validate it and you can make it mandatory, right? And you can specify a value to validate your claim. Okay. And then if you want to validate the expiry date, or if you have any custom claims the one I show you, right? So this is my custom claim. You want to validate this. If you want to validate the audience, you can validate the different claims here, right? But for now, I don't need that, right? So let's let it be like this. Okay. So here and click apply. Okay. So it may take a while to apply this policy to the proxy API. Right. So meanwhile, what I can do is I can restart this API. Redeploy. So it's redeploying this API. But if meanwhile it's redeploying, let me get your focus on something that we have already discussed and very important for you to understand. Action, edit. So this is the policy which is going to apply jot or OAuth 2.0 on the protected resource, right? So when I explain you about the jot, you remember we discuss the advantage of using the jot or jot token or the access token is that your protected resource, right? This guy, protected resource don't need to connect to authorization server for the validation of access token, right? It will able to validate the jot or access token by itself, right? And this is what we did just now. Okay, this is exactly what we did just now, right? When we configure the policy, we did not specify the any URL or any credential of Okta in the protected resource in the proxy API, right? We have just provided the public key, one URL, and that will only give the public key, right? So that is what we have discussed. Okay, so we are here. Let's see if my proxy API is ready or not. Okay, so still deploying it. Application started successfully, so it should be done now. Okay, so I think it's done. It sometimes can be UI issue, right? If I come over here, let's try to access this API now and go on header. Okay, so on header currently we are not sending anything, right? So let's send a request. Okay, so that is not applied yet. The policy is not applied yet, seems. We are not sending authorization header, so that should be good. So that's the problem. So sometime it takes a while, okay, to start and stop. It should not actually take this long, but sometime it happens. So let me start it again. I hope it will be quick this time. Let's see. Okay, so meanwhile this API is getting deployed. Let me uh, explain this to you, right? That how this thing is working, right? I mean, we have discussed this and we have I have already explained this to you, but just kind of recap in a fast forward way. Okay, and if you see, this example is a little bit different than what we discuss in our theory session, but if you very closely understand it and look at it, it's the same thing, right? In our theory session, we took the example of the draw.io as a client and the I as a resource owner, right? So here your draw.io wanted to access, or it has need to access Gmail account on my behalf, right? So I gave the authorization, right, partial authorization, to the, 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 authorization, draw.io and he used that authorization, right, to access the resource on the Google server or the API on my Google Drive on my behalf on the Google server. This one is little different, right? But the concept is still same, right? So it's like you have a technique, right? I mean, you have a Java, right? You does not build same kind of software. We have different kind of softwares, right? Using the same technology. So here also your OAuth 2 OAuth 2.0 is used, but differently, right? Here I'm not I as it is because if you remember, I enter my user ID password, right? I'm not the resource owner, right? Or but I'm still entering my user ID password so that authorization server know that yes, this is the Jayprakash, right? And after my what we call the authentication, right, I can also configure the scope so that I can get the uh, um, consent, right, and then the confirmation of the consent, right, and when I say allow to all the scopes, right, it will send the auth code to the client, and then client will send the request for the access token, and it will get the token, access token, right? So using this access token, right, this client will use the resource, right? So same OAuth 2.0 concept has been used to provide the access to a resource to a specific client or application, right? But your authorization server is different, right? It is a third party which is uh, providing the services for the authorization and authentication. Okay, so same dance, same concept has been applied. Okay, let's see if okay, proxy is deployed. Now if I try to access my API, it is still working, which means am I using the right proxy? Okay, let me see that once. Maybe I have missed some configuration. Let me check that. Okay, it says active. Come over here, and we are sending the post request, right? Because post has a body. Do we have a policy? Yep, I have a policy. Client ID validation, no, that looks good. Okay, let me see if we are sending that. Just I need to validate something. Just give me a second. Okay, let's do this. Let's send this request from different. Okay, and body raw. Okay, we have JSON. Yeah, so here is our JW2 token is required, JOT token is required, right? So this is error I'm expecting, and this is right as well. Let me do post. So actually it does not matter, right? So same thing, but it's not happening here. Then reason behind that is, I think, because I have my JOT token here. It is being sent in the in the header, right? So let me check the access token. That is fine. But I should be able to see that. Yep, here it is. I don't know why I was not able to see this. So I do not need this for now. Yep, I'm not able to. Okay, so actually what I did is, because I ran this authorization process, right, and I got the access token. That access token is automatically stored here in the header, right? So it is going with my request. So when I click on the send, it go with my request to the proxy API, and proxy API is able to validate it, right? Why? Because this access token is generated when I created this authentication, when I run this or dance, right? So I want to remove that. Let me see if there is a way to remove it. Access token is removed. Let me see if it's removed from here. Yep, I think it has been removed now. Okay, it is removed now. So yep, let's see. Yeah, so you got the JOT token is required. So we have applied our policy is working, which means, let me explain this here again, right? So now you have this API. Okay, we define this proxy, right? So when I'm sending the request from my client to this proxy URL, okay, to this proxy URL, it is, and because this proxy is configured to validate the JOT token, right? It is trying to look for that JOT token in the header as a bearer token, right? Because in my request I'm not sending it, right? It is saying JOT token is required, right? So I'm not able to access the API. Let's get the JOT token, right? If you see here, this I will get this JOT token using the authorization code or code flow, right, from the Okta, right? So my first request will go, and I'm going to show this to you as well. Right, let's clear it. Okay, this is my log console. Okay, let's come over here. Okay, I will come over here, and I want to history, clear history. Sorry. And I want to clear the history so that browser asks me to enter my user ID password again, and we look at end to end. Just give me a second. Okay. So if let me click on this get new access token. Okay, I'm still using my entered user ID password, right? But if you see, if you remember, when first time I got this, right, I enter my user ID password, so it is still using that same user ID password, right? So it says authenticated, right? So when I enter my user ID password, I got authenticated by the authorization server. Okay, now I click on this and I would say allow the postman to get the token. Okay, sync collecting access token. Okay, let it collect. Okay, so I think it timed out or something like that. Let me close this again. Clear today, clear, yeah, clear history. Oh, okay, okay. So my internet is not working now. Okay, my internet is not working because we have a internet network maintenance today. So let me see. Okay, so enable my phone hotspot so that I complete this session. So let's continue. Okay, so let me try this guy again. And before I try, I want to clear this. Okay, and let me click on the get access token. I'm here. There you go. Right, this one is important. So I clicked on the get access token, then I'm getting the option to enter my user ID password. So I'm being authenticated by the authorization server. Okay, so there you go. No, I don't want to say my password. I come over here, I click on allow. Okay, so your postman has now get the access token from the authorization server from the Okta, right? Now if I click on the use token, my token is now in the postman, right? So now if you look at the header, that post that the access token will send in the request when I will click on the send button, right? And it will send as an header, authorization header, as a bearer token. All right, so now, so if you remember earlier we were getting error, okay, that authorization is required, jot token is required, sorry, right? And I want to show you one more thing. Where is this guy? I did not capture, I think, the full. Okay, that's one I will show you again. Let's clear this and click on the send. Why is it taking so long? My net is working or not? Let me check that. Yeah, here it is now, right? So now I'm able to access the API. Got it? I'm able to access the API with my JOT token. Yeah, you can see here again, right? So this is OAuth 2.0 with the authorization code grant type. Okay. So before we, I will discuss this thing one more time, right? So that we get complete picture, right? But before that, I want to show you something, which is over here, right? So my console is clear. I will get this access token again. Get the access token. This time I may not have to enter the user ID password, but I think that does not matter. I click on the allow. Okay. As I say, proceed. This is my callback. Okay, let me do this one more time. Clear. This is callback. Okay, this URL is important as well. This is callback code, right? Can see here. That's fine. You get allow. You're allowed. And this is my post request. But there is a get request as well that I'm trying to capture. I'm not sure how you can do it. I think I will get it if I close all my browsers, right? Let me open it again. Yeah, and I will go here, clear history. So I'm basically trying to get that screen where it asks for the user ID password again. Okay, clear history. I close this. Okay, let's try one more time. No, cancel. Okay, it's not happening. So okay, that's fine. Let me explain theoretically again. Okay, so as per our discussion, right? So let me remove, if I can remove some of this clutter from this diagram so that explain it in a nice way. Yeah, it's happening. Just give me 1 second. Okay, there you go. That's it. Okay, it has removed everything. That's fine. Okay, so we have all right, and then API. That's fine, right? Let's do it quickly. Okay, so as we have discussed, right, you, when I click on this, right, get access token. Okay, what happens when I click on this get access token? Your client send a request, right, which means your Postman send a request to the auth endpoint, right, and that is the URL I wanted to show. I wanted to show what all information your client said, right, but due to some reasons not being captured here, I do not know why, right, and okay, and I was not able to copy it from here as well. Okay, so but anyways, so we know it, how it works. Okay, so it sends the redirect URI, right? Redirect URI means the URI where your authorization server will send the authorization code, right, and it also sends the client ID, right, and you can see all those things in the URL actually. Okay, and then the response code, which is for which value is code, and the scope, right, scope that what I have specified. What we have specified here. Okay, once your authorization server get this request, right, it will send the request to the resource owner. Okay, which is this screen. Okay, which is this screen. Now your resource owner is asking your sorry, your authorization server is asking resource owner to authenticate itself. So I'm authenticating. Okay, not now. So check this. Okay, let's come back to this. Okay, it enters my user ID. I enter my user ID password, click on submit button, it will go here. Your authorization server will validate that user ID password, right? And if for the scope consent is true, right, the authorization server will take my consent that someone is asking this kind of access. You allow or deny. If I say allow, it will go to authorization server again. When everything is done, right, verification and the consent, then your authorization endpoint, I mean the your authorization server will use the redirect URL, right, to send the code back to your client, right? If you see, this is the callback URL. We get this callback URL from uh, from the Postman, right? And where it is here, Postman, right? And if you look at this URL as well, right, it has code equal to this value. So this is the code that is generated by your authorization server. You can see it here. All right. Now when I click on this button, right, so basically that code Postman opens, right, and it copy that code. Okay, and after that, okay, once that thing happens, right, your Postman sends another request, right? It sends another request to the token endpoint, and that is what we have discussed in the in our theory sessions as well, right? Then your client will send another request to your access token endpoint with the client ID, client secret, and the token, okay, and the redirect URL as well. Then your token endpoint do all the validation, and it will issue the access token to your client, right? Come over here. If you look at this request, right, so we are sending a request to your token endpoint. Okay, this is your response body. I'm looking for host request body. So you can say that grant type this code that we received in our redirect URL URI from the auth endpoint, right? Redirect URI is again same. This is your client ID and this is your client secret, right? Now this request will go to this was the request that was sent by the client. It has validated it and it sends the access token back to your client, right? And that is what you see when this happens. Okay, this is your access code. Click here, click on allow, click on proceed. This is your access token. Okay, if we click on use, it go and store in the header that we can use to access the actual API protected resource. When I click on this, right, what will happen? Client will send, sorry, this guy. Client will send another request to your protected resource, but this time, right, basically it is in our case we are accessing the proxy API. It will send this request with the access token that we received from the previous request, right? And this request token come in the header, right? And this is your protected resource, protected resource API. All right. Now it will apply the jot policy on here, right? So in the jot policy, what will do? It will take the, it will do basically validate the signature of the jot, right? And I have already explained in previous session. You can look into that, right? I'm not going to repeat it again, right? Because that's a valid jot token, it will let this request to access my API. So this is how it works. Okay, so this is one flow. Now we can look into the other flows as well, right? Let's look at them quickly, because the other flows are not this complex, those are simple, and we don't need to change anywhere else to implement that flow. We don't need to change anything here, because my proxy API or my to my jot policy, it does not matter how that access token is achieved, right? As long as it has request is coming with a valid jot token, it is good, it can give access. Okay, so let's go over here and use other token type, which is your client credential. So in client credential, what happens? We send request directly to token endpoint, right? And we provide the client ID and client secret. So in this flow, right, we do not do resource owner authorization. Okay, because there is no resource owner involved. So this is for API, we use for the API to API communication, right? And I have explained this as well, so you can look into the previous session. Click on send. See, it's still working, right? If you look at the console this time, not this one, wait, sorry, let me get the access token first. Okay, get the access token, right? Proceed, right? So if you see, this time we got the access token directly without any authorization or authentication. Okay, so in this case, if you see, we send the request, right? When I clicked on the get the token, right, get access token, because this was a client credential flow, the request is directly sent to this token endpoint, right? And the token endpoint in the body, if you see, we have grant type as client credential, scope is call underscore add, client ID, client secret, right? Now I got the access token. Let's see if we can access the API or not with the new access token that we generated or received through this grant type. So let's send here. So if you can see, we're still able to access the API, because to my API it does not matter, to my policy or to my proxy API it does not matter how that access token was achieved. Okay, and now similarly there is one more grant type that we can, or one more flow that we can see. So this is my implicit grant type, right? So in what happens in the implicit grant type, in this one, right, I have explained this as well in the theory section. So we hit the your client hit the auth endpoint like this. Okay, to get the access token. But in this flow, authorization server does not generate the auth code, right? Because if it generates the auth code, then client has to send the another request to the token endpoint or to the authorization server with the user ID and password. But this flow is used in a situations or in a scenario where your user ID password cannot be securely stored, like in the JavaScript or something like that, right? So your request will be sent to the authorization endpoint, and your authorization endpoint will ask the resource owner, right? Your authorization endpoint will ask the resource owner to authenticate itself, right? Which means it will still ask for the user ID password. So if resource owner enters the user ID password, it will go to your authorization server if that user ID password is correct, and if there is any scope consent is required, that consent will be taken, and then your authorization endpoint directly generates the access token and provide to the client, and client use that access token to access the resource, protected resource. The only difference is access token is directly achieved or received from the auth endpoint, right? But and request go to auth because we need to authenticate the resource owner. Okay, so we have to say here implicit, and everything else will be same. So you can see here. So if you remember in the previous request, when my grant type was client client credential, we send the request, we send the post request, right? Remember that when we send the request to the token endpoint, it's always the post request. When we send the request or the client send the request to the auth endpoint, it's a get request. It sends the user ID, client ID, right? Yeah, a client ID. There is no client secret involved in this one, because in JavaScript, where this can be used, you cannot save the client secret, right? So and we are sending the request directly to the authorization endpoint. Okay, so click on here. You can see user is authenticated, right? So if user have to enter his user ID password, right? If that user ID password is correct and the consent is given for specific scopes, then only your authorization endpoint will generate access token. Okay, oh sorry, I have to click here. Okay, and I say allow. Timed out, I think. Let me say clear. Let's do this again. Okay, allow. Not complete Postman console for more detail. Postman console, something is not right. Let me see that once. That's not right. Back to token detail. Let me see. What is the invalid request? Why is this request invalid? Let's try one more time. Invalid request, error description. I'm sorry. Okay, in case of the implicit, okay, in case of the implicit grant type, okay, we need to provide one more parameter which called the notch. Okay, and the value of notch can be any unique string or the number, right? But we need to provide that. Okay, so let me provide this value for this parameter. Notch equal to, say suppose 1 2 3 4 5, doesn't matter. Okay, get access token. Okay, this time it is done, I think. Allow. Yep, proceed. Now here we have access token. So we use the implicit grant type, and we still got the access token, right? Here, access token. Now I have the access token in my header that can be sent to the proxy, Mule proxy API. And if I click on the send, it is sent. That's it. So you can see we used all three grant types to access the API, right? And when I implemented all three grant types, I did not update anything in the protected resource, and the reason behind that is to my protected resource, it does not matter that how the access token will be retrieved, or how that access token will be uh, received by the client, right? All it need the access token and the valid access token. And how it will validate that access token? It will validate that access token by itself, right? By verifying the signature using the public key, right? It does not connect with this. And client can get the access token three different ways. Why only three different ways? Because there are other flows as well in the OAuth 2.0. The reason behind that is application. So when we configured this application, we allowed only three grant types: client credential, authorization code, and implicit. So that is the reason I can demonstrate only three. There is one more. Actually, there is two more which are not. I don't know. There may be a way to configure them here, but I'm not aware of it because I do not know much about this portal. So yeah, so this is everything. I hope now there will be no question in OAuth 2.0, and the concept remains same, but the way you will implement it in other tools may different, but the concept remains same. Okay, thank you.